thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. As you guys mentioned, we'll be talking about turbocharging TeamCity with Octopus Deploy. I am a continuous delivery architect at Octopus Deploy in the customer success team, and what that generally entails is working with our largest organisations that purchase Octopus and helping them implement it, meeting regularly and making sure that they're successful with the product. This is the agenda. We'll start with a bit of background story about me and my story along that DevOps journey. We'll then go on to what is TeamCity, and then what is Octopus Deploy. We'll do a hands-on demo. It won't be exactly as described. The reason is what I've done is I've pre-configured a lot of the steps. With that is the reason for that is I wanted to take the time to explain it, as it was a bit with time and with it being 1 hour, it felt a bit rushed. That's all. But yeah, I look forward to your questions at the end. So a little bit about Derek. Obviously, I'm talking about myself in the third person, but I very much come from an ops background. I started out in IT about 15 years ago. And what I did was I started out in help desk, moved into system administration, release management, and then a bit of DevOps, and then eventually joined Octopus last year to help engage their customers a little bit better. And really, the reason my journey through my career, I've always worked with developers. You know, initially it was starting out just in the help desk, assisting them with things like installing software, and then it was provisioning physical machines, be it desktops or servers, and then bit by bit, you know, I was always there and working closely with developers. And then I actually did some release management, and what that basically entailed was normally sitting at 9 p.m. at night, like a lot of people back then, copying some, removing things from Microsoft's network load balancer, copying over some DLLs, some config files, testing it, manually adding it back in, and then obviously doing additional nodes. And I started using TeamCity and Octopus Deploy back in late 2012, early 2013. The reason for this was quite often, developers will come to you. There's probably an issue that's happened, and what was happening was there was a lot of finger pointing. Often the developers were like, "It's your servers," and you were like, "No, it's your code." And really, when you sat down and to sit down and try and work out if things happened, often, what's the difference? So it would often work in dev, test, and then it would blow up in production. And when you sat down afterwards, we got to a point, it was like, right, what are the differences between dev, test, and prod? By the time you sat down, you broke it down, you looked at it, it's only these 37 things. So the benefit that TeamCity and Octopus bring is that you can automate that. It's repeatable. You can build your artifacts once and really get it all the way through to production, so that you have a more consistent and reliable pipeline. Because ultimately, dev, there shouldn't really be much there. But yeah, that's it. So what is TeamCity? TeamCity is an intelligent continuous integration system. It, for the most part, does a lot of building and testing. Does some really interesting things with code and build quality tracking. It's technology aware, and one of the reasons TeamCity is dubbed that intelligent CI server is it's an approach to integration. Really, for instance, support for Visual Studio projects provides automatic detection of tool versions, code coverage, all that sort of good stuff. You get things like key integrations. Really, TeamCity and it integrates with pretty much everything. It may be your VCS, that could be SVN, that could most likely it's going to be GitHub, Git. It can be GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. Really, and also with that, it can integrate with your issue tracker and all that sort of good stuff. Additional to that, it also does infrastructure and cloud scaling. So in some organizations, like say for instance Uber Eats, you often find that they'll have to spin up more compute during busy times, generally lunchtime and at 5 till 8 p.m. And that's one of the benefits of TeamCity, is it can actually do your cloud scaling for you. Octopus also does that, and we'll talk through a few approaches here. Really, ultimately, when you start thinking about it, what doesn't it do? Obviously, it's not an IDE, but this is where it segues quite nicely into Octopus, and this is the good thing about TeamCity and Octopus, is they go together really well. So, what is Octopus Deploy? Well, Octopus does one thing, and it does it really, really well. It's a deployment tool, and it's an automated deployment tool. You can make it manual. I would generally recommend that where possible, you use the automated part of it. Often what you can do is you can automate things like releases between environments. So that could be pushing it from dev to test to pre-prod to production, and we'll go through that today as well. And one of the biggest things it does do really well is it's repeatable, reliable, and consistent deployments. It's a single, generally, often you'll have a single deployment process, and that will happen whether you're in development, test, all the way through to production, and then even disaster recovery. One of my favourite features as well about Octopus is that it's API first platform. Back in Octopus 2.0, most of Octopus was actually rewritten. So anything that you can do within the user interface, you can do over the API. And it does do cloud and on-premise. So often you see a lot of organizations who talk about having a cloud first strategy. For the most part, I generally still find that most organizations have some form of infrastructure on premise. Often what you'll find is they may have like dev and test on premise, and then pre-prod and productions in the cloud. It does things like infrastructure as a service. It does platform as a service, and software as a service. So yeah, and it does things, it does AWS and Azure, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. Okay, so in most organizations who have embraced CI/CD pipeline, this covers, honestly, I find that this covers pretty much about 95% of most organizations that I work with. What you'll normally have is a developer machine, that be it a desktop, a laptop, or a virtual machine. The person will normally be using something like Visual Studio or Rider, and then they'll be writing their code, and with that, the developer will commit the code often to something like GitHub or Bitbucket. And as with source control, you can have things like Git flow, so you can have all sorts of release branching and all that sort of good stuff. And this is where TeamCity really is great. What it does is it monitors the source control. That could be all your different release branching, or could be just your master branching. Today we'll just be doing master, but where TeamCity comes in, it's going to build your code. You're likely going to run your unit tests, and then you're going to create the artifacts. At this point, it then is going to pass those artifacts for deployment over to Octopus. More often than not, the deployment that happens will obviously go to dev first. That'll generally be automated. You can have things like automated deployments in development, and that may be something you can kick off in TeamCity. So for instance, every day at 7 AM, deploy master or a release branch to the development environment. Next, what you'll normally find is you've normally got your QA environment, or that could be your test environment, or pre-prod. At that point, it would normally be a tester. They would normally manually promote it within Octopus to the next environment, run their testing. That could be regression testing, that could be performance testing. And then lastly, what would normally happen is you'll normally have a web admin / ops and also a database administrator who will then promote it to production. And then that's it, it's live, and then it all starts again. So we're going to jump into the demo. I just want to talk about the demo first before jumping in. We have we're going to be using OctoFX as a solution. This is something you can get from our Octopus sample GitHub. And just to give you some background, OctoFX Limited is a fictitious London-based online foreign exchange company. Retail customers and businesses can register an account with OctoFX and can use the platform to trade currency. How it is, the solution overview is the application consists of 4 major components. The trading website, that's a customer-facing ASP.NET MVC website where customers trade currencies. Customers can register, log in, manage their beneficiary account details, get quotes and book deals. There's going to be a dealer portal with a deal settlement service. And then lastly, it'll be a SQL server database which underpins the entire system. So let's jump into TeamCity. Now, obviously, I'm sure some of you are familiar with TeamCity. What you've got here is the project, OctoFX, as I was explaining. And then at this point, you then have 4 build steps. And what you've got here is we'll jump straight into the build, package, and deploy steps. Oh, actually, one thing I forgot to do. What you can do is just read about how TeamCity and Octopus works. Is there is an integration, so there's a plugin that you can get from the TeamCity website. You see here, we are often publishing this plugin. So we Octopus maintain this plugin. So if you ever do have any issues with the plugin, please do get in touch. And then additionally, you can also get it from octopus.com/downloads, where you can see just beside the tentacle, you have the TeamCity plugin. Okay, so back to projects. So we're going to jump in to the build and package and deploy steps. So up here on the right hand side, you've got your edit configuration steps. So the first page you'll come to is your general settings. This is, as it says on the tab, you set things like your build configuration ID, your type, your build number format. In this instance, I went with semantic, with a date-based format here. And then this is where you would have your VCS routes. This could be things like GitHub, GitLab, etc. In this instance, we are just pointing it to a sample repository. You can do a whole bunch of really great things here that you could have different triggered builds. So when you check in, it automatically does a build for you. We won't jump into that just today, but that's us. We'll now jump into the build steps. The first step here is just doing the NuGet. It's just doing the general NuGet installation. It grabs it from the solution file, and that's it really. The next one is Visual Studio as well. So you've got here, what it's doing is it's taking the Visual Studio solution, and just before we jump into that, it's not just Visual Studio. So what you'd have a whole host of different runner types, from .NET CLI, AWS Elastic Beanstalk, Docker, and just general NuGet as I've shown you. And then there's a whole bunch of Octopus Deploy. So if you're doing some Redgate work, there's some Redgate SQL change automation. But yeah, in this instance, we'll be talking about a Visual Studio solution. So as you see, you specify the file path of the solution. You've got this building in Microsoft Visual Studio 2017. It's then rebuilding it, and then from the configuration, it's actually then creating it in a release configuration. And as I was mentioning earlier on, with the Octopus, this section here, Octopus packaging and Octopus publishing, this only activates when you've installed the plugin. This isn't here by default. So what you've got here is you've got the run Octopack. Octopack is an open source solution from Octopus. From here, what you'll do, it will run Octopack. It's going to add the package version, and then you're going to publish the packages over HTTP. This is just a local environment, and then specify the API key. I'll show you how to generate the API key in just a moment. So yeah, and then lastly, at this point, you've built the solution, you've posted it to Octopus, and then lastly, what you're going to do is you're going to create and deploy to development. You could have this in a separate step if you wanted. I generally just kick it off so that it's the dev, it's that automated approach that I was showing you earlier on. It's all very similar here. You've got the environment, you've got the project being specified, the release number, and this is one of, I really like this button. The reason for it is what you've basically got here is without checking this button, what's going to happen is it's going to post it, it's going to promote it, and it's going to do the deployment. It won't actually feed back whether that deployment was successful. This button here, what this will do with the deployment is it will check over the API, how the deployment is going. This feeds back into TeamCity, and I will show you it, but it generally means what you can do is the person who you can have this so that you can kick it off, deploy it all the way through to production, then DR, without actually having to log into Octopus. So that's something that I really like, because ultimately, if someone doesn't need access to Octopus, then you certainly don't have to give them it. Okay, and that's just your VCS trigger. So back to the next step. The next few steps are fairly similar. You've got this where it promotes it to test, so it's just a build configuration ID. There's no VCS settings. It is a single build step. You've got promote from dev to test. So as you can see here, it's just in the step name. You've got this here where you're the project. It's going to promote from dev to test, and similar to what I was explaining earlier on, you'll see the deployment process. And lastly, there is actually, so one of the benefits of TeamCity is you've got a build chain in place. You'll see that I have created 4 separate steps. The benefit of that is that if, say for instance, say you're using infrastructure as code, and you're only spinning up test based on time, and say for instance that's not available, so the script has failed or something. If you wanted to promote it to test and test is offline, this could fail. The benefit here is that what you can do is you can then run these steps individually, so that you can then automatically promote without having, you could technically all have that in a single build configuration, but it's generally best to separate them out. Okay, step 3, promote to production. That's it's just the same basically. It's just you change the promote from, promote to. You're still using the same Octopus URL and API key. You've got your build trigger here. So in the previous one, that would have waited for a successful build in the initial build configuration. In this instance, it's got a trigger that that waits on successful promotion to test, and then this will only kick in once that's happened, and I will show you it, and then it will continue with the deployment to production. Okay, and then lastly, you're going to promote this to disaster recovery. The way I've got this set up today is the primary server. Sorry, these are all different servers. It does have a shared SQL server, just to make things a little bit easier for this demo. But you've got dev, test, and production in Azure as virtual machines. It does do platform as a service, things like Azure Functions, Lambda, and all that sort of good stuff. But I am sticking to traditional VMs for this deployment, as it's still by the most, where most organizations are. But yeah, what we've got here is the disaster recovery is in AWS, and what we find is quite often we're now getting a lot of customers who do have a multi-cloud strategy, where they may have AWS as their primary cloud provider, and then they'll have Azure as a backup, or it could be Google Cloud. In this instance, the primary will be Azure, and then AWS as the disaster recovery environment. Okay, so we're going to jump in to Octopus. Let's close a couple of tabs. This is Octopus. What you've got here is this is the OctoFX, but when you log in first, this would be where you'll see the dashboard. What you've normally got here is your projects. Projects are normally something that you will ship at the same time. And then across here, we've got the different environments. This is dev, test, prod, disaster recovery. Firstly, what I want to do is just show you how to generate an API key. So from here, you into configuration, you've got users, and what I've got here is a TeamCity user, and then from here, it is actually a service account, and then you just hit new API key. This API key is the one that I generated a couple of days ago as part of this demo. And what you can do, and as a general recommendation, I normally have a team. In this instance, you'll see that the TeamCity is part of that, and then you assign the permissions to that team, which is inherited down to the user level. Okay, so back here, let's just let's jump into infrastructure first. What we've got here is environments. This is our different environments. So we've got Azure Dev, Azure SQL, we have Test, we have Azure Test, and we have Azure SQL. This is the one that I was explaining earlier on. This is the shared SQL server. And then prod, we have Azure Prod, Azure SQL, and then lastly, we have Prod DR, which is just an AWS web server with an AWS SQL server. So, okay, so this is where you would normally come in. You click into the project group. You'll see what version of the software. It is normally a little bit more complicated than this, but for this demo purposes, it's a fairly clean setup. So this is the bit that I was explaining to you earlier on. With this is where you would set your deployment process. And step number one is an approval step. This is one of my favorite ones. The main reason is not all organizations are ready for a fully automated deployment pipeline. And what this does do is you have an approval step. And what this is only doing is it's effectively it just puts a hold on your deployment. It gives you someone the ability to come in and approve that. We do find that a lot of organizations use this particular step. It gives, say, for instance, a release manager, a project manager, the ability to come in and approve this. Generally, I wouldn't recommend that you responsible teams here would be everyone. That would normally be like a release manager or the project manager or even a DBA, for instance, if it was that. And this is one of the conditions here, is this step will only run in production. The main reason for that is that you probably don't want to have dev, test, and pre-prod, so for instance, being blocked. You may find that pre-prod there you want that approval, but it really just depends on what your configuration is. So next up, there's a whole bunch of SQL steps. So with a database, what you'll do here is it will create the SQL user. If it doesn't exist, it does check if the user exists. It will create the database if it doesn't exist. This gives you, so if you did want to use a different database for every deployment, this is something you can do. And the next step then will create the database user if it doesn't exist. And then lastly, it will then add the database user to the role. At this point, you then have a fully mapped, set up database that's ready to accept your deployment. And step 6, you then have deployed database. This is the solution. Here you've got the OctoFX database hosted in the local Octopus server built-in package repository. I will jump in here and just show you, this is the one, it just shows you here, same idea. You would run this on certain roles within Octopus. Say for instance, in this instance, you've got OctoFX database. You would tag any infrastructure that is, for instance, this project. So that'd be the OctoFX part, and then the database part. You normally separate things out like web servers and database servers. You could have API servers. You can all have all that. You can really drill down and make this very customizable. Now, what you do have here is the Octopus variable syntax. This is a hash curly bracket syntax. It's called octostash. And what this does is you can set your variables here. So for instance, you have a global database server, then the admin user, and then what you can actually tier your variables within Octopus. So for instance, we'll normally have a global variable set. That'll be things like your global variable set, things like naming conventions, that sort of stuff. And then what you'll find is as you go down, you'll then have like a project, and then it could well be even separation out of all of that. Okay, so that's it. You've got here, we'll jump back to the deployment process. Lastly, you've got the deploy database. What you've got here is this will be running on the deployment target. This only runs on the OctoFX database. Just so you're aware, with the environment tagging and the role tagging, what it does is Octopus uses this to find out where it's deploying. So for instance, as you can see, you've got dev and then you've got OctoFX database. It matches that up and then decides on where the deployment is happening. You've got here, as I was saying, this is just a package. So it's a package feed, just so you're aware. You can use multiple external package feeds as well. And then there's some options here. Sorry about that, I've got a bit dry throat. And then what you've got here is I'll cover this in just a moment. But yeah. So that's there. So between steps 2 and 6, that's your database being deployed. Next, we're then starting similar to what we did with the SQL users and whatnot. We are now going to check if IIS is installed and install if not. This is a fairly basic step. This is something that I tend to recommend. It's just a PowerShell script that's been defined that adds in your dependencies. This is where if you do have, for instance, targets coming online at say 5 p.m. as you're scaling that up, you can install your dependencies as part of that. So for instance, if you added in an additional web node, it would go through and install IIS, then it would deploy the package and so forth. Okay. Next is rolling deployments. So rolling deploy, as I was saying earlier on, generally you would normally, and particularly in production, you would normally have a load balancer. So say for instance you had 8 web servers. What this does, what a rolling deployment does, is it gives you the ability to deploy to a subset of machines. So from here, with the 8 deployment targets, what you have is you can set the parallelism here. So if you had the 8, you may find that you can deploy to all deployment targets in parallel. That would generally take your website offline. Or what you could do here is have a window size of 1, 2, 4. That is, that's really up to you. Always run a proof of concept as part of that. And then lastly, what you're going to do here is you're going to remove it from the load balancer. So you'll remove web 1, and then you're going to deploy the website, and lastly add it back into the load balancer. But as you're deploying the website, there's a whole host of really interesting stuff here. This is an IIS web application, so you're deploying the website. The package, similar to what was happening before, is in it's a different package. So this is the trading website. You can configure this. So it is IIS. You've got a website. Or the options are website, virtual directory, or a web application. In this instance, it's a web application. And then you can set a whole bunch of really good things here, where you can things like virtual path, package installation directory, use custom paths, all that sort of stuff. And then here, if you then can set this is the variables that I was explaining earlier on. As that changes, you can obviously add in different variables for that, and then your identity can change as well. So configuration values, configuration variables, you can set this to replace entries in .config files, and then you can also set this in configuration transforms as well. I'm generally not a huge fan of configuration transforms. You'll normally find that you'll have more than one file to do. That's where I generally, in the past, I've normally defaulted to the Octopus variable substitution, as what generally happens here is it's a single place, but that's, as a non-developer, I know that this has caused some interesting conversations internally. So yeah, that's just my personal thoughts on it. And then lastly, so you may find at the end of it, we use Slack. What you can do here is you can just send a simple Slack notification. I have a demo Slack. You've got, obviously this pulls into a channel handle. You've got all the icons, username, etc. And then what you would just do here is it just deploys a message. This can mean that all your technical staff or project managers or release managers, etc., can do that, and they get that notification. Additional to that, you can also just send them an email, so that's something to consider. But yeah, generally it's good practice at the end of the deployment to send a notification. Okay, so you've got the variables as I was explaining. This is where you can obviously have all this. You get sensitive variables, so the project database password is a sensitive variable. You've got library sets, as I mentioned earlier on. This is where you would include, you don't have to include library variable sets, so this is where you would come in and set all this up. And then this is where, if you did have any deployment triggers, again, you can do that in TeamCity as well. But yeah, that's it. So now we're going to jump in and do a deployment. And we're going to build and then get it all the way through. So let's jump into projects. We're going to build, package, and deploy. I'm going to hit run. And that's it. Jump into the build log. And this is where obviously this is where the settings I was mentioning earlier on, it will take you through this. And what it will do is it will also give you the ability to see everything. So again, you don't have to have people logging into Octopus to see that. So there we go. It's built the solution really quickly. It's then adding the files. It's then going to create these files using Octopack and create the NuGet package. You can also just deploy to, you can also create a zip file if you want and deploy that. Octopus does handle that pretty well. But yeah, and that's it. So now it's publishing the artifacts. Apologies if you hear my dogs barking in the background. So that's it. What we've got here is it's coming in, it's creating the release. The release has been created successfully. We should now see development kicking off. We're going to stay on TeamCity here because I really like this feature. Mainly because it just gives you a single place that you can build, you can see everything, you can see your artifacts, you can see it being deployed. So this is where it's really beneficial, I find anyway. Here we go. And also one of the good things here is you can acquire the packages once it is in Octopus that first time. So it's got here. It's obviously it's found in the cache. It's already been sent over as part of the initial set. So that's great. That's it. Build. It has now done this. What we should see now is we should see a successful deployment in Octopus. You could manually promote this, but as you can see earlier on, this is a chain build, so that's kicked in. From here, we should then go back to the AutoFX project, and then we can see because that chain is in place, the build trigger is kicked off. We're now then promoting the Octopus deploy release. We're going to jump in and see the build log as it goes through. And then that's it. So as you can see, we've got this. It does pull the information back in really quickly. So we're in step 8. Okay, there is generally a slight delay. These things are happening very, very quickly. Okay, so it's checking if IIS is installed. And then that's it. It's sending a Slack notification, which has just popped up. But yeah, it's come up in my demo and so she showed me that. So now that's it. We've got a successful deployment. We should now see the promote to production is just about to happen. And there we go, promote to production. So this is where the manual intervention step at this point is going to kick in. So this is what here, the task is waiting for a manual intervention. Generally, you shouldn't ever assign it to, obviously I've kicked off that deployment. Generally, I wouldn't assign to me and then, but deployment is good to proceed. There we go, hit proceed. This is what you may find is here within production, what may be beneficial is if you don't have a lot of build agents here, what may be beneficial is at that point is actually unticking this box, because what does happen is there is a default of 10 minutes on the timeout. So what you can do is, say for instance, if you know that it might take a few hours to get a deployment to be approved, I would generally untick this. Or additionally, what you can do is you can add additional command line arguments here and then increase the timeout. So if you know that there's a quick turnaround, but just as a side note, this is something to, when you're using the manual intervention, you don't want to have all your build agents backed up because they're waiting for an intervention. But what we should see is back to the prod is now deploying. And this is one of the benefits. You can just kick back and relax. It's not, copying DLL files, configs, making all the changes. Everyone has a slightly different approach. Got a Word a Word document has your release notes that you have to check and tick or sign off. You do have this, and you have the full traceability. There's, there's a lot of auditing. It's easier to see exactly what's happened where, if it's, if Steve has accidentally done something a bit shady in production, then, what you can do is by doing everything, by using TeamCity and Octopus, you can see everything that's happening. So lastly, what we're doing now is we're promoting it to disaster recovery. So this is the AWS platform, and then that's it. As we've got here, you've got the full task log. You can see, for instance, if you did want to see all the different, say if you wanted to see verbose logging, you can jump in and see all the good stuff that's happening. Addition to that, what you can do is we also have guided failure mode. That is something, if you are troubleshooting a deployment, that's something I'd look at enabling, but by default, you shouldn't have that enabled. So we should now have a situation now where production has been, and NDR has been deployed. This is a bit of for the UK people, this is a little bit of a Blue Peter moment. It's something I've done earlier on, but as you can see, these are now loading. We've got this. So as you can see, Derek Demo Dev, UK South Cloud App, Derek Demo Test. These are all being deployed. Derek Demo Prod, so that's the Azure. You've got a login, you've got the back end there if you want to, and then lastly you've got AWS Web. But yeah, that's it. So if you want, you can get a quote, log in, and there, that's it. That is now. So what we've done here is we've went through, built the solution. Where possible, I'd always recommend running tests. From there, we've then built that solution, created the artifacts, pushed the artifacts into Octopus. We have then deployed to dev automatically. We've then promoted it to test, promoted it to production, ran a manual intervention, approved that within Octopus. And then at that point, it's automatically, as part of the build chain, then promoted that to disaster recovery to give you a multi-cloud strategy for your deployment. And we now have a working application. And that's really about it. So what I'm going to do is open it up to some questions. Anton, Igor, do we have any questions?
Yeah. So yeah, we have one question right away, and maybe there are some that are still coming. Yeah, feel free to ask them in the control panel here. So the first one, I'll just read it out, is from Ryan. Ryan is asking, what is your strategy on rollback process for database deployments? I assume your rollback for website is to rerun previous production deployment version.
That's correct, yeah. That's always a hard one, because ultimately with that is you've got two options. You roll back, but ultimately at that point you've got some solutions here where with the database, if you roll that back to say like a SQL backup, there's going to be loss of data. Or if you can roll forward or deploy a previous version of the database. So there's a few approaches there. Really, where possible, you should always roll forward, keep the data in place, but ultimately that is down to your own preference, but yeah, there's a few different approaches there. You can roll back, you can roll forward, you can restore a backup, but none of them are a perfect solution. There would, there may be some loss of data or some downtime. As an organization, and normally at that point, just a case of test it and implement that rollback strategy that best fits your pipeline.
Yeah, thank you. Another one has just come in from Steven. So what is the benefit of using the group child deploy steps versus just independent steps in the Octopus deploy process?
Okay, so the benefits are here is with the so you've got the parent, and you've got that so you've got your rolling deployments. This is your parent here, and then you've got your child steps. The benefit is if you had to configure this would be a case of, say for instance, the 8-node deployment that I was mentioning earlier on. If you're doing this deployment, you would have to say deploy to web 1, deploy to web 2, and then you would have to run remove from load balancer steps 8 times. So what this does do is it goes through and does a single target, then starts back at the at step like 8.1. So what you would have to, instead of having say 8 remove from load balancers, 8 deploy websites, and 8 add back into the load balancer, it's just basically, it makes it reusable, makes it more repeatable, and ultimately just streamlines this down for you, so that you don't have to go through all that. So yeah, that's it. It's just basically making it reusable and easier to deploy.
Yeah, another one from Lion. So should the project process be in some kind of source control? And if so, are there any tips?
We don't have, we have something that we do, it's actually something that we do get a lot of questions about. It's, we don't have anything just yet, but we do have ways to, there's ways to minimize having to like create this from scratch every time. Say for instance, we're currently working on something called composite step templates. What that will be is you can actually have it so you'll have like, say for instance you had the database side of things, you could actually have it so in composite step templates you would have something where it's you would have those 5 steps. So from step 2 to step 6, that would be a composite step template. What that would mean is you could just import those as part of your project. Additionally, what we also have is tenants. Tenants, for instance, we have a lot. Actually, I can give a quick demo of this. So what we have here is tenants. So this is our general demo here. This is what a normal Octopus server looks like. So in here, what you've got is, let me just have multi-tenant. This is just a fairly different process. So as you can see here is, so what you could do is often what we find is most deployment processes are almost identical. You'll deploy the database, you'll remove things from a load balancer, you'll deploy the application, you'll add it back in. Most we do see some weird and wonderful configurations, things like 125 step deployment process. What you can do is use tenancy, and then you can effectively reuse and then just push in different packages. So what you could do there, use tenants to really just have a single deployment process. What we additionally with that is you can have all these people, all the different approaches. So you might have OctoFX, you may have project Z, X, etc. And then what you can do is you can just have a single deployment process, and then from there actually just have it so that you just basically post it in with different packages. So if it's a different database, you create a different database package, and then you just reuse the same deployment process.
Yeah, well, another one is a bit tricky. So the question is, does TeamCity support builds on builds for iOS applications and Octopus deployment to Apple Store, like Microsoft App Center?
I'm not sure about TeamCity, but I know that Octopus doesn't do iOS or Android at the moment. It's something we do get quite asked pretty regularly, but no, that isn't something Octopus does. Anton, would you know about TeamCity? I'd imagine it would.
So for TeamCity,
yeah.
Go ahead, Anton. Yeah.
Yeah, you can basically execute the build for iOS from TeamCity. You probably need to install Xcode on the agent side and have a Mac hardware to actually run the build. But from TeamCity point of view, it's not a big deal.
Sounds great.
But
yeah,
the deployments to Apple Store, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
No, not from Octopus anyway.
Yeah, so you can execute the build, but the deployment part, probably not.
Yep, so I don't see any new questions. Also, I think you can directly ping either Derek at OctoDerek on Twitter, right? And or TeamCity at TeamCity on Twitter, and maybe ask any additional or follow-up questions to the webinar. We'll be happy to answer. And yeah, I think we can wrap up with this. Thanks a lot, Derek, for doing this, for running the webinar and doing the demo of this. Was a demonstration of how you can integrate TeamCity with Octopus Deploy and have your solution run through build stages and deployment stages in Octopus to multiple environments. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And again, thank you, Derek, for doing this.
No problem at all. One last thing, we are running a Octopus 101 at the end of the month. If you want to jump in and find out a little bit more, myself and Ryan Russo, another continuous delivery architect at Octopus, will be running that. There are also some Octopus samples to get you running on that. But thank you very much, everybody, and particularly the guys at JetBrains for having me.
Yeah, sure, no problem. That was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.